Morgan Metzer lived in Canton, a small city in Cherokee County, Georgia. There with her 2 children, she was a mother, a businesswoman, an interior designer, and she had recently done something very difficult. She had walked away from a marriage that had broken her in ways most people around her never knew. On New Year's Day, 2021, in the early hours of the morning, a masked figure dressed in all black broke into Morgan's home while she slept. Roughly 40 minutes later, her ex-husband arrived. He found her bound on the porch. He cut her restraints. He held her while they waited for the police. He told investigators that a stranger had knocked on his apartment window in the middle of the night and warned him that Morgan was in danger. He was the concerned ex-husband, the man who had rushed to her side. The hero? He was not. Morgan was 14 years old when she met Rodney Metzer at a baseball game. Rod was 17. He was confident and charming, and from the very first night he made an impression. Before the game was even over, he brought Morgan over to meet his mother, Kathy. He told her, "You're going to meet Morgan tonight. Be nice." For Morgan, it was immediate. She later described it as love at first sight, frightening in its speed and certainty. And Rod treated her, in those early years, as though there was nothing she could want that he would not find a way to give her. He called her his princess. They dated for 7 years before marrying in 2009. Morgan was 21, Rod was 24. Kathy Metzer, Rod's mother, would later say that Morgan was one of the most gorgeous brides she had ever seen. The ceremony was outdoors. The weather was perfect. By every account, it looked like the beginning of something beautiful. But before the marriage was even a year old, the family was struck by grief. Rod had a younger brother named Kevin. Kevin was 19 years old and had been battling leukemia. He died roughly 8 months after the wedding. Rod was devastated. His mother later said she didn't think he was ever the same after that. He became dependent on Morgan in a way he never had been before. Kathy said that in the weeks that followed, he barely left Morgan's side for more than an hour or 2. Morgan held him through it. She was his anchor. Then, in 2011, the couple had a son of their own. They named him Kevin, after Rod's brother. He was born premature and arrived with a congenital heart defect. He lived for 18 days. He died on April 2nd, 2011. What would have been his original due date. Morgan later described that period as a big blur with all the emotions. She and Rod had now lost 2 Kevins in the span of little more than a year. Roughly 3 months after the baby's death, Morgan discovered she was pregnant again. In 2012, twins were born, a daughter named Mills and a son named Mason. They arrived healthy, and for a period, life settled into something that resembled stability. Morgan said she saw her mirror image in Mills. She described Mason as the champion she needed. On the surface, the Metzer family looked like a success story. Rod worked in sales and trading. Morgan was raising the children and growing increasingly passionate about home design and renovation. They had a house in Canton. They had 2 healthy kids. They had each other. What was happening beneath that surface was something else entirely. The first time Rod physically attacked Morgan, they were out on a boat with friends. It was a Labor Day weekend. The details of what provoked it were never made fully public, but what happened afterward was telling. Rod had no marks on him. Morgan did. By the time the night was over, Rod had convinced their friends, and Morgan's own parents, that she was the one who had been out of control. Friends stopped talking to her. She became isolated. And that isolation was not an accident. It was the beginning of a pattern that would define the next several years of her life. The abuse Morgan described was not a single explosive event. It was a slow and systematic dismantling. Rod would pick fights, then deny them. He would accuse her of things she had not done. He would make her feel as though her own memory could not be trusted. Once, when they argued, he deliberately rolled down a flight of stairs and then turned to the children and said, "Look what Mummy did. Can you believe she pushed me? He was using the children as instruments. He was rewriting reality in real time, and he was doing it in front of the people Morgan loved most. The sexual abuse was something Morgan only came to name later. At the time, she simply endured it. He was aggressive, she said, and he would not take no for an answer. It was years before she was able to recognize that for what it was. He also watched her. He installed surveillance in the home. He photographed her text messages when she left her phone unattended. He searched how to crack an iPhone password. And on at least one occasion, he took photos of her through the shower glass without her knowledge, images she would not discover until police found them on his phone. The financial dynamic shifted during this period as well. Rod lost his job roughly a year after the twins were born. He moved into day trading, but it was unsuccessful. Morgan, meanwhile, had launched a home design and renovation company called Shiplap and Sugar, and it was thriving. She became the primary breadwinner. By 2020, she'd won a Reader's Choice Award for the business in Canton. She was building something. He was losing everything. And for a man who had made control the centerpiece of his identity, that combination was dangerous. Morgan later said, "The last 4 years of the marriage were like living with a monster that constantly tried to break me down and fence me in." In 2020, she filed for divorce. The divorce was finalized in December 2020. Morgan kept the family home in Canton. Rod moved to his own apartment, roughly 12 minutes away. They maintained what Morgan described as a friendly enough relationship for the sake of the twins, who were 8 years old and needed both their parents present. Morgan's best friend and business partner, Nicole Stabaszewski, observed the change in Morgan after Rod moved out. She later said it was the first time she had seen Morgan have peace. Something had settled in her. The person who had been slowly crushed for years was beginning to breathe again. Rod was not adjusting nearly as well. He texted Morgan persistently. He asked her to come back. He told her he would make enough money. He said she could quit her job right now. She declined repeatedly and consistently. She had made her decision. Around Christmas Day 2020, Rod called Morgan with news. He told her he had been diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. He was scared, he said. He needed her. He had documentation. A letter from a doctor, a hospital billing record. Morgan let him stay at the house. She slept in her bedroom. Rod slept on the sofa. She told herself it was the compassionate thing to do. He was the father of her children, and she believed he was dying. What she did not know was that Rod had created a fake email account and used it to generate the cancer diagnosis letter himself. The hospital invoice was fabricated. The doctor did not exist, and while he stayed in her home under the pretense of illness, Rod was not resting. He was working. He tampered with the basement window alarm sensor, removing it from the frame and placing both pieces side by side on the sill so the system would still read them as connected. When the window was later opened from outside, no alarm would sound. He photographed Morgan through the shower glass. He photographed her texts. He was planning something. On the 31st of December, Morgan had finally had enough. She told Rod he needed to tell his parents about the cancer diagnosis. He refused. She told him to leave. He did, but before he went, he slid a check under her porch. $56,000 made out to Morgan. He sent her a text. "You should have all the money. You deserve everything." She later realized the check would have bounced. There was nothing in his account. But the check achieved what Rod needed it to achieve. Morgan had told him she would be spending the night at her parents' house. But she went back to the house to retrieve the check, went inside, set the alarm, and went to bed. Rod spent New Year's Eve sending texts. "You need to get back with me." She stopped responding. It was just after midnight when she finally fell asleep. She did not know that Rod was already on his way. At approximately midnight on the 1st of January 2021, Morgan woke to something in her bedroom doorway. A silhouette, lit from behind, dressed head to toe in black, hoodie, trousers, gloves. a mask that angled upward at the top, like Batman's, and he was standing completely still, fists clenched, rigid, like he was ready. She screamed. She later said it was the most painful sound she had ever made. He charged at her. He jumped on top of her and began pistol whipping her with the butt of a handgun. He punched her. His voice was disguised, deep and altered like Batman from the films, and he spoke to her. "You're going to regret this. You've done really wrong now." Then he said something that changed everything. "You messed up. You're going to be fine, but we can't say that about your ex-husband. You're really going to miss him." Morgan responded carefully. "No, don't hurt my husband. I love him very much." And in that moment, she knew. The reference to her ex-husband, the specific phrasing, the way this figure moved and stood and breathed. She knew who was behind the mask. She made a decision, and it was the right one. She did not let him know that she knew, because she had no idea what he would do if he realized she had recognized him. So she played along. She stayed still. She answered his questions. She survived. He strangled her twice. The first time brought her close to unconsciousness. The second time she thought it was her last breath. She later described it as the worst feeling in the world, to believe in that moment that you are dying. He zip-tied her hands behind her back. The restraints had been prepared in advance, 2 zip ties interwoven and pre-looped. He sexually assaulted her. He demanded jewelry. He ripped through drawers. He took her phone, made her give him the passcode, used the home security app to unlock the back door remotely, and then deleted all camera footage from the cloud system. He placed a pillowcase over her head, and then he walked her, naked, bound and hooded, out to the back porch and left her lying face down in the cold. "Do not get up until you hear 2 car honks," he told her, "or I'll kill you." He left. The honks never came. Morgan lay motionless in the freezing air. She was injured. She was alone. She could not see and could not move her hands. She later said she was terrified that someone else might still be out there watching. So she stayed perfectly still. She tried to stay conscious, knowing that with head injuries, falling asleep could be the last thing she did. She listened to the sound of a nearby stream and she waited. For roughly 40 minutes she lay there alone. Then she heard footsteps on the stairs. "Oh, honey, what happened?" Rod's voice. He cut her zip ties. He helped her up. He held her while she stood on the cold back porch, battered and bleeding, her eye already swelling shut from the pistol whipping. He called 911. "Somebody broke in over here." She was on the back porch. She was tied up with a hood over her head. Morgan later described watching him in those moments. His shock, she said, was not the shock of a man seeing his ex-wife beaten. It was the shock of a man seeing what he had just done to her. He was seated beside her when deputies arrived. He looked like a concerned family member, according to District Attorney Shannon Wallace. He told investigators he had been at his apartment, getting ready for bed, brushing his teeth when someone knocked on his window and said Morgan's name in a threatening way. Worried, he had come straight to the house. He had no explanation for why he went to the house rather than her parents', where Morgan had told him she would be staying that night. Sergeant Dakota Livers arrived at the scene at around 3 in the morning. Rod was in his car with a deputy. When Livers confirmed who he was, Rod snapped at him, "Do your fucking job." For a man who had supposedly just rescued his ex-wife from a horrifying attack, the hostility was striking. Livers filed it away. Morgan, speaking to investigators away from Rod, told them directly that she believed her ex-husband had been the one behind the mask. She had recognized the way he walked, the way he moved. Even through the disguise, she knew the body she was looking at. Sergeant Robert Hall confronted Rod at the scene that same night. He told Rod plainly, "There is no way in hell that someone knocks on your window and says her name, and you immediately come here, and she happens to be bound with a pillowcase over her head." Rod had no satisfying answer, but what happened next moved the case from suspicion to certainty far faster than anyone anticipated. When investigators asked Rod to hand over his phone, which he voluntarily did, they found a hidden folder. Inside it were photographs Rod had taken of Morgan through the shower glass without her knowledge, and screenshots of her private text conversations with another man. That was enough. Rod was arrested on New Year's Day itself, standing on Morgan's porch, for invasion of privacy and giving false statements. The exchange was captured on her home security camera.
You didn't have that permission.
Yeah,
Y'all don't have that relationship. She's baffled that you have that. That's stalkerish.
People make mistakes, and
I think you made a lot of mistakes.
People make big mistakes.
Are y'all kidding me?
Nope, we're not kidding you. This is not a joke. Come on.
2 days later, on the 3rd of January, investigators brought Rod in for a formal interview. By that point, they had already executed search warrants on his car and apartment, and what they had found there had changed everything. Inside Rod's apartment, within moments of crossing the threshold, investigators found an open bag of black zip ties. Beside it, a cut portion of a zip tie tail, separated from the restraints. On a surface nearby, a book titled 7 Ways to Be Her Hero. And in another location in the apartment, a suicide note. Also recovered, a forged cancer diagnosis letter and a fabricated hospital invoice, both created through a fake email account Rod had set up to impersonate a doctor. In his car, a handgun. But the single most devastating piece of evidence was the zip tie match. Crime scene technician Melanie Thrasher examined the restraints that had been used on Morgan's wrists. One had an unusual feature. 2 extra zip tie heads had been ratcheted onto it and then cut. When Thrasher compared the cut tail found in Rod's apartment against Morgan's restraints, the striations aligned exactly. It was, as Sergeant Horf later described it, a perfect match. He added, "I would never have imagined having a piece of evidence like this." The zip ties had been purchased 2 days before the attack. Sergeant Horf used the Lowe's app on his own phone to scan the UPC code from the bag in Rod's apartment. He traced the purchase to a transaction made on the 30th of December 2020 at a Lowe's store in Cherokee County. It was paid for by debit card. The card belonged to Rod. Surveillance footage from the store confirmed the purchase. It had been filmed during the height of the COVID-19 pandemic, when nearly every customer was masked. Rod was not. His face was perfectly visible on the camera. Apartment building surveillance provided the next revelation. There was no footage of anyone knocking on Rod's window that night. There was no mysterious stranger. What the cameras did show was Rod arriving back at his apartment that evening, disheveled, moving quickly. And then, just 4 minutes later, at 1:24 in the morning, Rod left again. He was wearing completely different clothes and different shoes. He was carrying a plastic bag. That bag was never found. Investigators searched the contents of Rod's phone and laptop for his browser history. What they found was a window into the weeks and months before the attack. How to change the sound of your voice. How to choke someone unconscious. How long before you starve to death. How to get sympathy from your ex. Cancer diagnosis letters. How to crack an iPhone password. Each search was a tile in a mosaic, and the picture they formed was unmistakable. On the 3rd of January, when investigators sat across from Rod in the interview room, they had all of it. Sergeant Livers confronted him with the cancer lie. Rod's demeanor shifted. "I don't know if I should talk to you guys anymore," he said. "I'm starting to get a really bad feeling about what angle you're coming from." He tried to turn the interrogation back on the investigators. He told Livers, "I've already learned something about you. Your facial expressions, you keep scratching yourself and you get agitated by what I say." When investigators told him they had found zip ties in his apartment, he denied it flatly. "I don't have zip ties," he said. Sergeant Harris replied, "I know you don't. We have them now." When Rod was told that forensic analysis had linked the zip ties in his apartment to those used to restrain Morgan, he paused. "There's something funny going on here," he said. Deputy Chief ADA Rachel Ash, who took the case to sentencing, later described what the investigation had revealed about Rod's original intent. She said the evidence suggested a plan to kill Morgan and then himself. When he couldn't go through with that plan, he pivoted. He devised a new plan to rescue her instead, to play the hero, to use her trauma as a doorway back into her life. That is what the book in his apartment was about. That is what the search history was about. And that is why, when he arrived on her porch in the middle of the night, he already knew exactly what he would find. Rod Metzer was charged with 14 felony counts, including kidnapping, home invasion, burglary, armed robbery, aggravated assault, aggravated battery, sexual battery, false imprisonment, and possession of a firearm, during commission of a crime. On the 4th of August 2021, he pleaded guilty to all 14. There was no trial. There was no jury. Ada Rachel Ash made the decision to accept the plea because she wanted Morgan to have closure sooner than a trial would allow. She also stated plainly, the evidence was overwhelming. This is a prosecutor's dream case, she said. He took the guilty plea quickly. Rod received a sentence of 70 years, 25 years to be served in custody, followed by 45 years on probation. The majority of his custodial time is ineligible for early parole. His earliest possible release date is the 31st of December 2045. He is permanently banned from contacting Morgan or their children in any way. Ada Ash called Rod a master manipulator. She said what had been planned was first a murder. When he could not go through with it, he chose to orchestrate a rescue instead. He wanted to be the man she ran to. He wanted to be the reason she stayed. Morgan delivered her victim impact statement before the court. She looked at Rod and said, "The last 4 years being married to you was like living with a monster that constantly tried to break me down and fence me in. It was a blessing in disguise. I can now walk with the confidence knowing the pain you have given me is turned into power." Morgan later described leaving that courtroom. She said it felt like £1,000 had been lifted from her shoulders. She said she got the last word. This case has since been covered by CBS 48 Hours, featured on Investigation Discovery's Evil Lives Here, and adapted into a Lifetime film titled Gaslit by My Husband, The Morgan Metzer Story, which reached #1 on Netflix in 2026. It has been watched by millions. Morgan has said that is the point. The more people who understand this pattern, the more people who might recognize it before it reaches its breaking point. Because for Morgan, the breaking point was a masked figure in her bedroom doorway at midnight on New Year's Day. But the story did not end there. She survived. She stood in that courtroom. She looked the man who had beaten and strangled and bound her in the eyes, and she told him that everything he had done to break her had only made her stronger. That is who Morgan Metzer is.